What if the most powerful transmitter ever built isn't sitting in a laboratory or orbiting the Earth in a satellite, but resting quietly between your ears, broadcasting its signal every waking moment of your life, whether you're paying attention to it or not? Good evening, my friend. I want you to imagine just for a moment that somewhere deep within you, nestled behind your eyes, cradled within the quiet architecture of bone and tissue, there sits a radio station. Not a small one. The most sophisticated, the most powerful broadcasting and receiving station ever conceived in the history of this universe. It runs 24 hours a day. It never sleeps. It never takes a holiday. And here is the part that should make you sit forward in your chair. It is broadcasting right now. At this very moment, as you listen to these words, your brain is sending out a signal. And the world around you, your relationships, your opportunities, your results, is receiving that signal and responding to it accordingly. This is not poetry. This is not philosophy dressed up in comfortable language to make you feel good for an evening. This is the oldest, most verified truth about human beings that has ever been observed. And yet, most people go through an entire lifetime without ever once sitting down and asking themselves a single honest question. What exactly am I broadcasting? Let us begin there. The great thinkers of every age, from the Stoic philosophers of ancient Rome, to the pioneering psychologists of the 20th century, to the neuroscientists of our modern era, have all arrived by different roads at the same remarkable destination. The destination is this: your outer world is, in astonishing measure, a reflection of your inner world. Marcus Aurelius said it in a palace in Rome nearly 2,000 years ago. William James said it in the lecture halls of Harvard. And the evidence continues to mount with every passing decade of human research. What a man thinks about consistently, habitually, without even realizing it, that is what a man becomes. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. You may be sitting there saying, "But Earl, I don't choose my thoughts. They simply arrive. They come at me from every direction, from the news, from my worries, from the people around me. How can I be held responsible for what simply appears inside my own head?" And that, my friend, is precisely where we need to pause. Because you are absolutely right and absolutely wrong in the same breath. You are right that thoughts arrive uninvited. The brain is a receiving station, remember. It picks up signals from everything in its environment. Every conversation you overhear, every image you glance at, every piece of information you consume, all of it comes pouring in through the antennae of your five senses and registers itself somewhere in the vast, humming network of your mind. You cannot always control what knocks on the door. But here is what you can control, and this is the turning point of everything I have to say to you tonight. You control whether you open the door and invite that thought to sit down and stay for dinner. That is the discipline. That is the practice. That is, in the truest sense of the word, the art of living. You see, there is an enormous difference between a thought that passes through your mind like a cloud across an afternoon sky, and a thought that you grab hold of, turn over in your hands, rehearse repeatedly, and ultimately plant into the fertile soil of your subconscious. One is a visitor. The other becomes a resident. And residents, as you know, have a way of redecorating the place. Let me give you a picture that I believe you will carry with you long after this broadcast is over. Think of your conscious mind as the gatekeeper of a great city. Every day, hundreds of travelers arrive at the gate. Some of them carry goods that will build the city, ideas of courage, possibility, gratitude, discipline, love, creativity. Others arrive carrying something far less useful: doubt, fear, resentment, bitterness, self-pity, the quiet, insidious whisper that says, "You are not enough. The world is against you. Nothing will ever change." The gatekeeper's job, your job, is not to be surprised by who shows up. All manner of travelers will arrive. The job is simply this: to look each one squarely in the eye and make a conscious, deliberate decision about who gets in. Most people have abandoned the gate entirely. They have walked away from their post. And so the city of their mind fills up with whoever and whatever happens to wander through. And then they wonder why the city looks the way it does. Now, let us talk about the receiving side of this magnificent station, because it is equally important and, if anything, even more frequently misunderstood. Your brain does not merely broadcast outward. It is constantly scanning, searching, and receiving from the world around it. And here is the subtle genius of it. Your brain is selective in what it receives. It operates according to something that psychologists call a reticular activating system, a kind of internal filter that highlights and draws your attention to whatever matches the dominant thoughts already living in your mind. In simple language, you find what you are looking for, not because the world rearranges itself for your convenience, but because your attention, shaped by your habitual thoughts, becomes a spotlight. And a spotlight only illuminates what it is pointed at. Think of it this way. The moment you decide to buy a particular make of automobile, a specific color, a specific model, you suddenly begin seeing that car everywhere, on every street, in every parking lot. Were those cars always there? Of course they were, but your mind was not tuned to receive them. The moment your dominant thought changed, your receiving station retuned itself accordingly. Now, apply that same principle not to automobiles, but to opportunities, to solutions, to the evidence that your goals are achievable, to the people who might help you, to the ideas that might carry you forward. If your dominant broadcast is fear, you will receive confirmation of danger everywhere you look. If your dominant broadcast is possibility, the very same world will begin delivering you reasons for optimism. Same world, different signal, entirely different life. This brings me to something I want you to consider with great seriousness, perhaps the most important single sentence I will speak tonight. You are what you repeatedly think, not merely what you occasionally wish. Wishing is easy. We all wish. We wish for health, for prosperity, for better relationships, for a life that feels meaningful rather than mechanical. But wishing operates at the surface. Wishing is like standing at the window of a radio station and hoping the music changes, without ever once touching the dial. Your habitual thought, the thought you return to most often, the thought that runs like a low background hum beneath all of your daily activity, that is your true broadcast. And your life, with all of its textures and outcomes and recurring patterns, is simply the return signal. So I am asking you tonight, perhaps for the first time anyone has ever asked you this directly, what is your habitual thought? Not your best thought on your best day. Your habitual thought. The one that is waiting for you when you wake at 3 in the morning. The one that arrives before your coffee has brewed. The thought you return to when no one is watching and nothing is distracting you. That thought is your compass heading. And wherever that compass is pointing, that is where you are going. Now here is where we move from observation into action. Because understanding something, while valuable, changes nothing on its own. The question is always, what do we do with what we know? The answer is elegantly simple. It is not easy, nothing of lasting value ever is, but it is simple. Guard the gate, tend the garden, choose the broadcast. Begin starting today, starting this evening, before this broadcast has even ended, by becoming aware of your habitual thoughts. Simply notice them. Observe them the way a scientist observes a specimen, with curiosity, without judgment. When you catch a thought arriving at the gate, pause for just one moment and ask yourself, is this a thought I want to build my life on? Does it serve the man or woman I am committed to becoming? Does it move me toward the life I have decided to create? If yes, welcome it in, reinforce it, repeat it. Feed it with evidence and action and gratitude. If no, acknowledge it, and then, with quiet but absolute authority, redirect your attention. Not with force, not with shame, simply with the calm, practiced decisiveness of someone who has remembered that they hold the dial. This is not a once-a-week practice. This is not something you do when you happen to remember it. This is a daily discipline, as consistent as any exercise routine, as deliberate as any professional craft. The great achievers of every era were not born with finer brains than the rest of us. They simply learned, early or late, to take responsibility for what was being broadcast from within them, and then they refused to surrender that responsibility to circumstance, criticism, or comfort. I want to leave you tonight with a thought I hope you will return to often. Somewhere inside you, right now, at this very moment, there is a version of yourself that is already the person you most want to be. That version is not a fantasy. It is not wishful thinking. It is the natural outcome of what happens when a human being learns to align their dominant broadcast with their deepest intention, and then holds that signal steady, day after day, with patience and with faith. Your brain, this extraordinary, tireless, incomprehensible instrument that you were issued at birth, and have perhaps never fully appreciated, is capable of far more than you have yet asked of it. It has been waiting, quietly and faithfully, for you to take your place at the controls. The broadcast tower is yours. The frequency is yours to set. The only question left is this: what will you choose to transmit? I want you to stop for just a moment and consider something that, once you truly understand it, you will never be able to unhear. Right now, without your permission, without your awareness, and without a single conscious instruction from you, your brain is sending out a signal. Not occasionally, not when you decide to think productively or sit down to plan your future, but right now, this very second, and every second of every hour of every day that you have ever lived. That thought may settle uncomfortably in your chest at first, because it means that all those mornings you woke up exhausted and told yourself the day was already lost, that was a broadcast. Every afternoon you sat in traffic rehearsing an argument that hadn't happened yet, that was a broadcast. Every quiet evening you spent convincing yourself that people like you don't get the kind of life you secretly want, that too was a broadcast going out clearly, consistently, and without interruption into the vast machinery of your own mind and behavior. You have been transmitting your entire life. The question that should concern you, the question that should make you lean forward and pay very close attention, is simply this: have you ever once decided what the signal would be? Now, here is what I want you to understand about how this actually works. Your brain operates very much like a radio transmitter in a broadcasting station. Every thought you hold, particularly the ones you return to repeatedly, the ones you rehearse without realizing it, the ones that feel so familiar they seem like facts rather than choices, gets converted into a frequency. That frequency then travels outward and influences everything it touches: your posture, your words, the decisions you make at crossroads, both large and small, the way you enter a room, the way you respond when life pushes back, the opportunities you reach toward, and the ones you quietly step away from because some old, unexamined broadcast told you they weren't meant for you. This is not abstract. This is the mechanism by which your life is being constructed, day by day, thought by thought, transmission by transmission. And here is where everything changes. The moment you understand that your brain is always transmitting, the moment that truth lands not just in your intellect but in your bones, something shifts. Because you realize that you are not a passive passenger in this process. You are the broadcaster. You are the one with your hand on the equipment. You have simply been running the station on autopilot, playing whatever recordings happen to load themselves during the earliest and most unguarded years of your life. But autopilot can be disengaged. The broadcast can be changed. Not by force, not overnight, but through the steady, patient, daily practice of choosing, deliberately and consciously choosing, what signal you send out into the world. Your brain is always transmitting. Make certain it is broadcasting the life you actually intend to live. You were issued a transmitter at birth. The only tragedy is living an entire lifetime without once choosing your own frequency. I want you to think about something that most people have never once stopped to consider in their entire lives, and yet it is happening to them, without pause, without mercy, and without their awareness every single day. You are being programmed right now, not by some distant authority, not by a machine you can see and switch off, but by the accumulated weight of everything you have allowed into your mind, the conversations you have sat inside, the content you have consumed before your eyes were fully open in the morning, the voices you have permitted to speak the loudest in the hours when your guard was down and your mind was soft and open and receiving. And if that thought does not arrest your attention immediately, it should. Because here is what nobody told you when you were young, and what far too few people discover before the better half of their life has already passed them by. Your brain is not only a transmitter, it is, with equal power and equal consequence, a receiver. And unlike the transmitter, which at least requires your thoughts to originate somewhere within you, the receiver asks nothing of you at all. It simply collects, it absorbs, it accepts without question or discrimination whatever signal is strong enough and consistent enough to reach it. Put plainly, your mind will become whatever you repeatedly expose it to. Not partially, not in some minor, decorative way, fundamentally, structurally, in the very way you see yourself, interpret the world, and decide what is and is not possible for a person like you. Now let me explain what is actually happening beneath the surface of all of this. Your brain, particularly at the level of the subconscious mind, does not distinguish between what is real and what is merely repeated. It does not apply judgment to incoming signals the way your rational, waking mind attempts to. It simply registers frequency and consistency. It asks one silent question of every signal that arrives with enough repetition. Is this true? And its method of answering that question is not logic, it is volume, it is exposure. It is the sheer accumulated weight of how many times a particular message has arrived through the antenna. This is why the environment you inhabit matters so profoundly, not as background, not as scenery, but as a constant active incoming broadcast that your brain is receiving and cataloging and slowly, quietly accepting as the definition of normal, the definition of what is real, what is possible, and who you are. The voices you listen to most become the voice inside your head. The ideas you surround yourself with become the boundaries of your imagination. The standards held by the people closest to you become, over time, the gravitational field within which your own ambitions either rise or settle. And here is where the horizon opens. Once you understand that you are a receiver, once you accept that your mind is not a sealed vault but an open, responsive, continuously updating instrument, you realize that you hold a power far greater than merely defending against what you do not want. You hold the power of deliberate input. You can choose, starting today, to bring your receiving antenna into contact with signals of an entirely different quality. The words of men and women who have thought deeply and lived purposefully. Ideas that expand rather than contract. Environments that reflect the standards you have decided to hold for yourself. Conversations that leave you more capable, more clear, and more committed than you were before they began. Your brain will receive whatever you consistently place before it. It has no choice, that is simply its nature. But you do have a choice. And that choice, made deliberately and honored daily, is the difference between a mind shaped entirely by accident and a mind built with quiet, patient, unstoppable intention. You are a receiver. Tune yourself accordingly. You cannot afford to be careless about what enters your mind, because what enters long enough and often enough will eventually become the voice you believe is your own. I want you to consider something that, on the surface, may sound like a simple observation, but the more carefully you turn it over in your mind, the more you will realize it contains within it the explanation for nearly every pattern in your life that you have never been able to fully account for. Most of what is living inside your mind right now you never invited in. It arrived quietly. It arrived early. It arrived during the years when you had no framework for evaluating it, no vocabulary for questioning it, and no understanding whatsoever that you even had the right to refuse it entry. It came through the words of people who were themselves never taught to guard their own minds. It came through repeated experiences that drew conclusions without your conscious consent. It came through 1,000 small moments of criticism, comparison, and disappointment that stacked themselves, one upon another, into a structure so familiar that you eventually stopped noticing it was there. And now it lives in you, rent-free, uninvited, and in far too many cases completely unexamined. If that thought settles heavily, good. It should, because the weight of it is precisely proportionate to its importance. Now, let me walk you carefully through what is actually occurring when an unguarded thought takes up residence in the mind, because understanding the mechanism is the first step toward dismantling it. Your subconscious mind, that vast and tireless engine running beneath the surface of your daily awareness, operates on a principle of acceptance rather than judgment. It does not evaluate the thoughts that arrive with sufficient frequency and emotional charge. It does not ask whether they are accurate, whether they are fair, or whether they serve your highest interest. It simply receives them, and over time, with enough repetition, it files them under one quiet, consequential heading: truth. Once a thought has been classified as truth by the subconscious mind, it ceases to feel like a thought at all. It begins to feel like a fact. It begins to feel like you. And that is the precise moment when an uninvited tenant stops feeling like a stranger in the house and starts feeling like a permanent resident who was always meant to be there. This is how a child who was told repeatedly that they were not particularly clever grows into an adult who unconsciously avoids every situation that might require them to be clever, not because they lack the capacity, but because a long, settled tenant in their mind has convinced them the capacity was never there to begin with. This is how a person who absorbed, early in life, the belief that money is the domain of other people, luckier people, better connected people, people somehow different from themselves, will find, decade after decade, that opportunity appears to pass them by. not because the world is withholding from them, but because an uninvited tenant is quietly, consistently whispering the terms of what they are permitted to receive. The tenant is not loud. That is what makes it so dangerous. It does not announce itself. It operates from within the very framework through which you see the world, which means you are not seeing the tenant at all. You are seeing through it as though it were a lens rather than an obstruction, and here is where everything begins to shift. You can serve the eviction notice, not with rage, not with desperate, exhausting effort, but with something far more powerful and far more sustainable, with awareness followed by deliberate, consistent replacement. The moment you identify a thought that has been living in your mind without your conscious consent, you have already broken its most fundamental power over you, because that power depended entirely on invisibility. It depended on you accepting it as fact rather than recognizing it as a tenant, one that arrived uninvited and has simply never been asked to leave. From this evening forward, when a thought arrives that diminishes you, that contracts your sense of what is possible, that speaks to you in the language of limitation, stop. Look at it directly. Ask it the one question it cannot survive: did I choose you? And if the answer is no, and in most cases you will find that it is, then choose something else. Deliberately, repeatedly, with the calm authority of someone who has finally remembered that the house belongs to them. Unguarded thoughts are uninvited tenants, but the door has always been yours to control. The most dangerous beliefs you carry are not the ones you chose. They are the ones that moved in quietly, long ago, and convinced you they were you. I want you to sit with something tonight that may, at first, produce a very uncomfortable realization, one of those truths that feels almost too simple to be significant, and yet, once it takes root in your understanding, will explain more about the trajectory of your life than almost anything else you have ever been told. You are not who you think you are. You are who you have repeatedly told yourself you are. And the difference between those two statements is not a matter of words. It is the difference between a life lived by default and a life constructed by design. It is the difference between a man who wonders, year after year, why nothing seems to change, and a man who finally understands the single mechanism responsible for building or dismantling everything he has ever believed about himself and the world he inhabits. Take a breath. Because what comes next is not a cause for despair. It is, when you fully grasp it, one of the most liberating discoveries a human being can make. Here is what is actually happening inside that remarkable instrument you carry with you every moment of your life. Your brain, specifically the deeper, non-rational architecture of your subconscious mind, does not learn the way a classroom teaches. It does not respond to single, brilliant moments of insight the way we might wish it did. It does not permanently reorganize itself around one powerful conversation, one moving book, one transformative weekend of inspiration, however genuine those experiences may be. Your brain learns through repetition. It is wired, at its most fundamental level, to accept as real and as permanent whatever arrives with enough consistency and enough frequency to wear a groove into its circuitry. Neuroscientists describe this process in terms of neural pathways, the physical, biological channels that form and deepen in the brain's structure every time a particular thought or behavior is repeated. The more a pathway is traveled, the wider it becomes. The wider it becomes, the more naturally and automatically the mind moves along it, until eventually the pathway feels less like a choice and more like gravity. This is not a flaw in the design. It is, in fact, a feature of extraordinary elegance. It is the mechanism by which a child learns to walk, by which a musician builds mastery, by which a surgeon develops the steadiness of hand that comes only after 10,000 repetitions. Repetition is the brain's method of converting the effortful into the effortless, of transforming the intentional into the instinctive. But, and here is where we must be absolutely honest with ourselves, this same mechanism works with equal precision and equal permanence on every thought you repeat, not only the useful ones, not only the ones you repeat with conscious purpose. Every thought that you rehearse with sufficient frequency, regardless of whether it serves you, gets carved into the architecture of your mind and eventually elevated to the status of automatic belief. Worry, rehearsed daily, becomes a disposition. Doubt, entertained consistently, becomes a default. The quiet, habitual thought that the best things in life are for other people, repeated across weeks and months and years, becomes a lens through which every opportunity is unconsciously filtered and found wanting before it is ever truly considered. You did not choose these beliefs in any direct or deliberate sense, but you repeated your way into them. And the brain, faithful and indiscriminate as it always is, built the pathways accordingly. Now, here is where the horizon opens wide and the air becomes easier to breathe. If repetition is what built the architecture you are currently living inside, then repetition is precisely the tool with which you can rebuild it. Not by tearing down what exists with brute force, not by sheer willpower alone, which is an inexhaustible resource and a poor foundation for lasting change, but by the patient, consistent, daily practice of introducing a new thought, a chosen thought, a deliberate thought, a thought aligned with the person you have decided to become, and then repeating it until the brain does what the brain always does with sufficient repetition. It builds a pathway, and the old pathway, no longer traveled, no longer reinforced, begins quietly to narrow. It does not disappear overnight, but it fades, and in its place the new pathway widens until the thought that once required conscious effort begins to arrive on its own, naturally, automatically, as though it had always been there. This is not wishful thinking. This is the brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, responding to the language it has always understood best. Begin tonight. Choose one thought that reflects the life you intend to build. One clear, honest, forward-facing thought. And repeat it. Not once, not when you remember. Every morning before the noise of the day arrives. Every evening before you surrender to sleep. Repeat it until it stops feeling like an affirmation and starts feeling like a memory of who you have always been. Because repetition is the language of the brain, and you now hold the pen. You will not think your way into a new life in a single moment of clarity. You will repeat your way there, one deliberate thought at a time, until the person you chose to become is the only person the brain knows how to be. I want you to consider something tonight that most people spend their entire lives completely unaware of, and yet it is operating inside them with the quiet, relentless precision of the most finely calibrated instrument ever devised. Right now, beneath every conversation you have, beneath every decision you make, beneath every action you take, and every action you quietly talk yourself out of, there is a thought running, not loudly, not dramatically, but constantly. A thought so habitual, so deeply worn into the fabric of your daily mental life, that it has long since ceased to feel like a thought at all. It feels like reality. And here is what that means for you, because this is the part that should make every serious, honest person pause and look inward with genuine courage. That thought, whatever it is not merely passing through your mind like weather passing through a valley. It is actively, continuously, and with absolute impartiality directing the course of your life. It is determining which roads you turn down and which ones you pass without a second glance. It is shaping the ceiling of your expectations, the floor of your standards, and every square foot of the space you permit yourself to occupy in between. You have been navigating by a compass you never consciously chose, and until this moment you may not have even known you were holding one. Now, let me explain precisely why this is true, because the explanation is not mystical, it is mechanical. And once you understand the mechanism, the power shifts entirely in your favor. Your dominant thought is simply the thought you return to most often. It is the mental address where your attention goes when nothing else is specifically demanding it. It is the background hum beneath the music of your daily life, present in the quiet moments, present in the distracted ones, present in the early hours before the world has fully started, and in the late hours after it has finally stilled. And your brain, that extraordinary navigation system you were issued at birth, treats your dominant thought with the same functional seriousness that a ship's compass treats magnetic north. It uses it as a reference point. It orients every decision, every perception, every interpretation of incoming information around the fixed bearing of that dominant thought, and then it steers accordingly. This is why two people can stand in identical circumstances and see entirely different landscapes. One man looks at a difficult situation and his dominant thought, shaped by years of returned attention to possibility, immediately begins calculating routes forward. Another man stands in the same situation and his dominant thought, worn deep by years of rehearsed limitation, immediately begins compiling reasons why forward is not available to someone like him. The circumstances did not produce those two responses. The compass did, and this is equally true of the larger arc of a life. The person whose dominant thought revolves day after day. Around what they lack will find that lack confirmed everywhere they look, not because the world is conspiring against them, but because a compass pointed at scarcity will navigate every crossroads in the direction of more scarcity. While the person whose dominant thought returns, consistently and faithfully, to what they are building, what they are becoming, what they fully expect to one day hold in their hands, that person's compass is pulling them, hour by hour and choice by choice, toward the coordinates of everything they have dared to believe is possible. This is not the difference between optimism and pessimism. It is far more specific and far more consequential than a matter of general outlook. It is the difference between a life steered deliberately and a life steered by default, between a destination chosen and a destination merely arrived at. Now, here is where clarity replaces confusion and the path forward becomes visible. You can reset the compass, not by pretending the old bearing was never there, not by suppressing or denying the dominant thoughts that have been quietly steering you, because what you suppress does not disappear, it simply operates beyond your view. But by doing something far more effective and far more lasting, you replace the bearing with a better one, consciously, specifically, and then you practice returning to it every time your attention drifts, every time the old heading reasserts itself, every time the familiar gravity of an unexamined habit tries to pull you back to where you have always gone before. The new dominant thought does not need to feel true yet. It does not need to arrive with immediate conviction or instant emotional certainty. It simply needs to be chosen clearly, held deliberately, and returned to consistently, until the brain, faithful as always to whatever it hears most often, begins to treat it as the fixed point around which everything else orients. Decide tonight what your dominant thought will be. Write it down. Make it specific. Make it directional. Make it worthy of the destination you have decided you are moving toward. Then return to it. Tomorrow morning, tomorrow evening, the day after, and the day after that, until it becomes the compass bearing your life navigates by, not by accident, not by inheritance, not by the accumulated weight of every unguarded moment that came before, but by choice. Deliberate, informed, and irreversible choice. Your dominant thought is your compass. Point it somewhere magnificent. It is not the grand decisions made in moments of high resolve that determine the direction of a life. It is the thought a man returns to most often in the ordinary hours, for that thought, quiet and consistent, is the compass by which everything else is steered. My friend, not someday. Not when the conditions are right, not when you feel ready, not when the world gives you permission. Today. Tonight, before you sleep, take out a piece of paper or open a blank page on whatever device sits nearest to you and write down in plain and honest language the dominant thought you have been broadcasting. Then, directly beneath it, write the thought you choose to broadcast instead. Make it specific. Make it true. Make it worthy of the life you intend to live. Then read that chosen thought in the morning. Read it at midday. Read it before you sleep. Say it until it stops feeling foreign. Say it until it begins to feel like home, because that is exactly what it will become, the new operating frequency of a mind that has been claimed, guarded, and deliberately directed by its rightful owner. You were given one mind, one life, and one broadcast. Make it deliberate. Make it purposeful. Make it magnificent. This is Earl Nightingale reminding you, as always, that we become what we think about. Good night.